This is English shorthand dictation number 207 and the dictation speed is 120 words per minute. Ready? Start. I appreciate very much the kind invitation of your secretary to come and address you this evening. I was hesitating to accept this invitation for two reasons. In the first place, I can say very little which can bind the government. Secondly, I can say very little about trade unionism in which you are primarily interested. I accepted the invitation because your secretary would not take a no from me. I also felt that this was probably the best opportunity I can have to speak out my thoughts on labor organization in India, which have been uppermost in my mind and which I thought may even interest those who are primarily interested in trade unionism. The government of human society has undergone some very significant changes. There was a time when the government of human society had taken the form of autocracy by despotic rulers. This was replaced after a long and bloody struggle by a system of government known as parliamentary democracy. It was felt that this was the last word in the framework of government. It was believed to bring about the millennium in which every human being will have the right to liberty, property, and pursuit of happiness. There were good grounds for such high hopes. In parliamentary democracy, there is the legislature to express the voice of the people. There is the executive, which is subordinate to the legislature and bound to obey the legislature. Over and above the legislature and executive, there is the judiciary to control both and keep them both within prescribed limits. Parliamentary democracy has all the marks of a popular government, a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. It is therefore a matter of some surprise that there has been a revolt against parliamentary democracy, although not even a century has elapsed since its universal acceptance and inauguration. There is revolt against it in Italy, in Germany, in Russia, and in Spain. And there are very few countries in which there has not been discontent against parliamentary democracy. Why should there be this discontent and dissatisfaction against parliamentary democracy? It is a question worth considering. There is no country in which the urgency of considering this question is greater than it is in India. India is negotiating to have parliamentary democracy. There is a great need of someone with sufficient courage to tell Indians that parliamentary democracy is not the best product as it appeared to be. Why has parliamentary democracy failed? In the country of the dictators, it has failed because it is a machine whose movements are very slow. It delays swift action. In a parliamentary democracy, the executive may be held up by the legislature, which may refuse to pass the laws which the executive wants. And if it is not held up by the legislature, it may be held up by the judiciary, which may declare the laws as illegal. Parliamentary democracy gives no free hand to dictatorship, and that is why it is a discredited institution in countries like Italy, Spain, and Germany, which are ruled by dictators. If dictators alone were against parliamentary democracy, it would not have mattered at all. Their testimony against parliamentary democracy would be no testimony at all. Indeed, parliamentary democracy would be welcomed for the reason that it can be an effective check upon dictatorship. But unfortunately, there is a great deal of discontent against parliamentary democracy even in countries where people are opposed to dictatorship. That is the most regrettable fact about parliamentary democracy. This is all the more regrettable because parliamentary democracy has not been at a standstill. It has progressed in three directions. It has progressed by expanding the notion of equality of political rights. There are very few countries having parliamentary democracy which have not enforced adult suffrage. It has recognized the principle of equality of social and economic opportunity. It has recognized that the state cannot be held at bay by corporations which are antisocial in their purpose. With all this, there is immense discontent against parliamentary democracy, even in countries pledged to democracy. The reasons for discontent in such countries must be different from those assigned by the dictator countries. There is no time to go into details, but it can be said in general terms that the discontent against parliamentary democracy is due to the realization that it has failed to assure to the masses the right to liberty, property, or the pursuit of happiness. If this is true, it is important to know the causes which have brought about this failure. The causes for this failure may be found either in wrong ideology or wrong organization or in both. I think the causes are to be found in both. As an illustration of wrong ideology which has vitiated parliamentary democracy, I can only deal with two. I have no doubt that what has ruined parliamentary democracy is the idea of freedom of contract. The idea became acceptable and was upheld in the name of liberty. Parliamentary democracy took no notice of economic inequalities and did not care to examine the result of freedom of contract on the parties to the contract, should they happen to be unequal. It did not mind if the freedom of contract gave the strong the opportunity to defraud the weak. The result is that parliamentary democracy, in standing out as protagonist of liberty, has continuously aided to the economic wrongs of the poor and the oppressed. The second wrong ideology which has vitiated parliamentary democracy is the failure to realize that political democracy cannot succeed where there is no social and economic democracy. Some may question this proposition. To those who are disposed to question it, I will ask a counter question. Why did parliamentary democracy collapse so easily in Italy, Germany, and Russia? Why did it not collapse so easily in England and the USA? To my mind, there is only one answer, namely, there was a greater degree of economic and social democracy in the latter countries than it existed in the former. Social and economic democracy are the tissues and the fiber of a political democracy. The tougher the tissue and the fiber, the greater the strength of the body. Democracy is another name for equality. Parliamentary democracy developed a passion for liberty. It never made an agreeable contact with equality. It failed to realize the significance of equality and did not even endeavor to strike a balance between liberty and equality, with the result that liberty swallowed equality and has left a progeny of inequities. I have referred to the wrong ideologies which, in my judgment, have been responsible for the failure of parliamentary democracy. But I am equally certain that more than bad ideology, it has bad organization which has been responsible for the failure of democracy. All political societies get divided into two classes, the rulers and the ruled. This is an evil. If the evil stopped here, it would not matter much. But the unfortunate part of it is that the division becomes a stereotyped stratification, so much so that the rulers are always drawn from the ruling class and the class of the ruled never becomes the ruling class.